Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Bo Talifer and Eric Rasmussen. Episode 22, Theoretical Understanding and Music Theory.
All right, Eric, so we want to talk about learning our theory.
It's time for theory. Yeah, theory gets a bad name in music learning theory.
It's tough here. This is an issue that I feel conflicted about because inside the MLT community, I feel like I want to go against the grain and say the type of theory that Gordon talks about is more important than is made out to seem by the MLT community. But I also, at the same time, understand why, the MLT community and Gordon has classically had this view on theory being, essentially evil.
Yeah, well, music theory and theoretical understanding are two distinct things.
For sure.
But music theory lives inside of theoretical understanding, of course.
Yeah.
And theoretical understanding presupposes that there's some audiation, but there's flat out just some information that's theoretical that I think I introduce early in the process, maybe earlier than some people would recommend. This might cause, some consternation. Again, we like to cause trouble out there in the world with regard to what traditional music learning theory, how music learning theory faculty, work with this issue. And I'm not 100% sure how they cover this because I took my certification classes with Dr. Gordon, and of course all the classes I had at school, that I got an understanding. But it's also, as you grow through it, you start to realize that there's certain bits of information that are just flat out theory that I think are very helpful, fairly early in learning sequence.
I agree. And one of the things that I brought up when we look at, there's 2 points I want to make here. The first one is that when the general music population talks about music theory, they're often talking about music notation. And so that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about we're not necessarily talking about just putting notation up. We're talking about concepts above and beyond that. But the other thing I wanted to talk about more within the MLT community is that when we look at the skill learning sequence, people, I think, get a too macro level view of this. So the skill learning sequence, it exists in many different iterations. So through the tonal learning sequence, through the rhythm learning sequence, and you even go through the skill learning sequence multiple times with, microbeats, macrobeats, divisions, elongations. Now, what I see with the theoretical understanding piece is say for example, I have a student who's learned tonal patterns and has gotten to symbolic association and all that stuff just with 1 and 5, in major and minor. When I start to bring the instrument to this and show them how to find these tonal patterns on their instrument, whether it's a guitar or piano, or even on the notation, there are some bits of theoretical information that are very useful to know for accelerating that process. Like, hey, you notice every time we find a tonal pattern, do, mi, so, and then you got to find T. T was right next to do on the guitar. And it doesn't matter what key we play it in. And you might not even explain what keys are and all that, but you can just change keys on them and have them. That little piece of information, like T and do are next door neighbors, is totally a theoretical piece of information, but it's super practical depending on what instrument they play. I find on the guitar and the piano, that specific case is really useful. Notation, T and do are next to each other on notation, but it even, it gets more theoretical on the piano and the guitar. They're literally next door neighbors on the instrument. And I think that is an appropriate type of theory to teach somebody when they can already audiate that and read that. And to not show them that is kind of just leaving it up to them to possibly figure out or not figure out on their own.
Yeah.
Which they may not, right? They may not abstract that principle on their own.
Yep. A piece I know I do when I've got kids that are doing root melodies or even melodies, and they can already audiate them, but I want to transfer them to uh, the xylophone. First of
Mm-hmm.
all, I set up the xylophone. It's not just the white keys that most people use, or I see people use all the time. I'm adamant about that. They have all the options there in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
The black keys as well. But it's like, okay, I want to do, just do, 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 so, do. And we're going to play that while I sing the melody, or you sing the melody and play that at the same time, or whatever. So where do we start? Well, I'd like everybody to start on A. So this
Mm-hmm.
note is A, but their xylophones, what? They have an A on the keys that are A. So
Mm-hmm.
isn't labeling the letter name a piece of theoretical information?
Yeah,
It,
I think it often is. I mean, I try to when I first teach piano students and guitar students, I try to do everything by rote without even telling them name of the pitch. But as you know, I've been playing around with using pitch letters as verbal associates
yeah,
more,
yep, yep,
and yeah, I do think it's different in that case, possibly. But still, it's a piece of memorized knowledge that may or may not be associated with their audiation. Hopefully, it is, because that's really the problem with music theory is when it's not associated with what people can audiate.
right. So here's this thing that they've sung a million times. They know that pattern, and I tell them to start on A. I give them a couple minutes. Can anybody find, so, do? Can you find where so is? You start on A. So you're going to do A, then find so. Can you find it? Do you know where it is? Some people have an intuition about it sometimes, but often kids, are just confused. So and I could spend
Totally.
a lot of time for them finding it by ear, or I can just tell them, all right, we're going to go A, and if I've got 25 kids in my classroom and they've all got a xylophone in front of them,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I've covered, some basic coordination kinds of things, or hold the stick this way, uh, or any other number of things. Um, so when I've got kids that have had an opportunity to try to find a tone by ear, I like doing that. But then eventually it just becomes easier to go, A, and they already know
Mm-hmm.
how to audiate it, but they don't know necessarily how to find it on the xylophone. And then when
Sure.
we go to do, we do start on C, and then I don't tell them, but they have a sense of, it's got to be the same distance, or they should. I don't tell them anything like that. I just say, all right, here's do, right? Because I want them to understand the relative difference. I don't do parallel at that point, at the very beginning, but
Sure.
just to tell them the letters. It's such a time saver if they've sung it a lot, and you're pretty certain that they can audiate it. Otherwise, the worst I'm doing for those who are having trouble audiating some of these, really complicated root melodies in terms of the rhythm, uh, or the harmonic rhythm, uh, the worst they're doing is imitating.
Yeah.
And I don't think imitation's a bad step toward helping them audiate on an instrument. So I'd like them to be able to
Yeah.
audiate completely and find it on their own. But if not, I'm teaching them by letter names. After, of course, that we've sung the tune and the root melodies together, and
That
they
situation
understand the
is very
functions.
interesting too, because the xylophones you're using have the letter names on them, so you don't have to go through this
Mm-hmm.
process of getting them to memorize everything first. Like if you went, a couple of weeks and got them to memorize what all the pitch letter names of the xylophone notes were, and then you asked them to do it, I don't know if that's necessarily uh, for the way you're teaching, where you're still using solfege movable do, it's not necessarily that useful to do that. You might as well just have the name right on the instrument.
Yeah, I teach them the syllables. They sing the patterns. They can do them individually. They know the tune. They audiate. And now I'm just trying to advance quickly their performance ability on the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
That's really it is. It's a shortcut to
Sure.
get them all up to snuff, because I've got, you've got a concert coming up, for instance, right? And you
Yeah.
can't always let the kids find it on their own, which I think would be ultimately better, but a longer way. Now I'm teaching group classes, and you're teaching individually.
I was going to say something about that as well, because in a individual class, there's still recitals at the end of the year and all that, but you can kind of just allow that to go on a bit longer than trying to find it. But I do find that sometimes when people are trying to find it by ear, if they're audiating the tonality they're in and they're audiating the keyality properly and where the resting tone is, sometimes when they play a wrong note, um, or even the right note, after playing a few wrong notes, they might start to be using their listening audiation with the air quote wrong notes they play, and
Yeah,
it sounds like they're just playing a new song to themselves, and they can get distracted along the way.
yeah.
I don't know if you've seen this before. So if they're looking for so, but they actually play fa, and fa doesn't sound wrong to them as like an aberration of tonality, and so
Uh,
they need to take a second to kind of
Yeah,
step
but they
back.
they can correct them. This is the thing. When I'm doing one at a time or whatever, then they correct themselves if they're audiating. They are I just ask them, did you play that the right way, or was it wrong?
Yeah,
Did you recognize the mistake?
for sure.
And usually they tell you that in their body. Like they cringe or they jolt, or
Well, that's that
you don't even
sour
have
note
to
thing
fight.
from music, language, and the brain, right?
Yeah.
That was that study that Ron was telling us
Yeah.
about. I started reading that book actually.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I'm a few chapters. I read the part on tonality, or yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So I mean, there's
So,
all. Go ahead.
well, I think a big category of theoretical information comes in instrumental association. Like I was teaching this kid who was 7 or 8 years ago, and we were doing tonal patterns, and I taught him that do and mi are always a certain distance from each other on the guitar. If do's here, mi is always here. And then what he said, I let him play piano in the class too. He said, well, if do's here and I got to count up this many frets to get to mi, and then I put do here on the piano, I can just count up this many keys to get to mi on the, and he figured that out on his own.
Yeah,
And that is 100%, a piece of theoretical information.
yeah.
But if I hadn't told him, do, if I hadn't told him he had to count up this many frets to get to mi on the guitar, he wouldn't have done that on the piano.
So that
And
little piece of information gives him access to all the keyalities on something he already knows how to audiate.
and
Right?
this is what I was saying about the skill learning sequence, is that piece of theoretical information, it's it's appropriate because it's only giving him theoretical information about stuff he's already pushed through the skill learning sequence. I'm not then saying, more things. I'm not all of a sudden getting
Yeah.
into a lecture about why major scales have this many half steps, and I'm not necessarily getting into that. I'm just giving him more information about things he can already audiate and how to manipulate them in different ways.
Yeah. I've never done that, but generally, my kids are. I don't think I've ever done that. Tell them how much is in between what. But my kids are all 7 and under, and
Hmm.
I just have different things, different priorities to help them find do mi, because and my xylophone. I'm not teaching xylophone lessons all year. I'm just adding a instrument to what it is, because I want them to have fluidity on, or some understanding outside of their singing voice.
Sure,
It's like,
sure.
so that they have an under, so that they can begin to explore, because you can't explore which note I like, um, in your voice the same way you can when you have an instrument. Because instrument, I'm going to play this note, and that note is what I intended or not. And they can, right? It's like right in terms of what they're exploring with. It's like that's what they wanted to go for, or
There's
that
no doubt.
doesn't. And, it
Yeah,
either matches the melody or not, or whether it matches the function or not. Because when I get to the instruments, I let the kids, and I think this is a really important part of a jazz sequence of learning improvisation, and before that creativity, is that you can experiment and explore and know what fits, what doesn't fit, if you've got an instrument in front of you that's diatonic, or that's it's not a violin, it's not a trombone, it's not a trumpet. It's
Yeah,
laid out. It's got a visual pattern that helps reinforce the the tonality or even the rhythm.
totally. The instruments are very useful for experimentation and that side of creativity. I studied with a guitar teacher in Vancouver, and we were doing a lot of improv and songwriting together. And I didn't like this one chord that was in a song, and I was kind of making a big deal about not finding a chord that I liked there. And he was like, "Look, unless you're really getting out there, there's 12 major chords, there's 12 minor chords. Just try them all. It's probably going to be one of those." And that's something you can really do on an instrument. But to do that with your voice only, it would be quite a giant achievement just to be able to run that experiment with yourself.
Doesn't Barry Harris have a different number?
Or Rand Blake.
Rand, yeah. Who is it? Like
Yeah.
there's more than the 12 major, 12 minor.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously.
There's
I
like
mean,
a different way he gets to a number of what you need to know, like 32 or something. And I still didn't quite get it, but
so Rand does in the appendix of Rand Blake's book, Primacy of the Ear, is he has these exercises where you learn to you play you stay in one keyality, so let's say C, and you take a tonic chord, C major, and then you learn to hear every other major chord beside it and every other minor chord beside it. And then you
yeah,
do the same thing except with a minor tonic chord. So he gets 48, I think 48 triads out of that.
yeah,
And then uh his reasoning is that if you can hear that in the key of C, you've got the structure to hear it now in every key. You just have to deal with changing keys. But yeah, I mean it's a useful, but I mean that exercise is constructed from a theoretical basis, right? And that's really the
yep,
power.
yep,
What we're talking about is the power of theory is that it really gives you this power to generalize. Um, it gives you power to generalize things that may be worth experimenting with,
yep,
which it's not necessary to be a good musician by any means, but there's no doubt it's very interesting for composing and
yeah.
and
Well,
songwriting.
that's a pretty advanced level of using theory that, you know, how do you definitely want to be able to be improvising and creating prior to doing that kind of exercise.
Which I
Uh,
agree with, and
so
and so this is probably when we get into why some people don't do well with theory and why some people do, is there's just a random assortment of people. When I went to high school, I could audiate pretty well. I didn't have verbal associates. I kind of stitched together my own method of doing that. But some teachers would teach me
yeah,
theoretical stuff, and it would
yep.
really stick strongly
Well, I
in my
totally
mind.
use theory with my little ones. 4 or 5 years old. And they've got so many rhythm patterns in their vocabulary, and I've had them for a couple of years, and they're doing divisions, elongations, syncopations, pickups, rests,
Hmm.
and we've done butt a buzz and 5/8 and 7/8, and if I got some kids that are smart in there, in addition to being really musical, I just put, look, here's a note with a dot, here's a note without the dot. Here's a different kind of note with a dot, and here's the same note without a dot. You know what the dot says? It says you could hold three little beats, and I show them, dotted half note, dotted quarter. I can even show them dotted whole note, and say, now these are the little beats. This holds three, this
Yeah.
holds two, and the little beats, and I just show the three little beats underneath the big beat in three different iterations. So from the very beginning, they can understand 3/4, 6/8, uh, whatever.
Totally.
That they're in rhythmic meters.
Hmm.
So, um, you
And I
know,
think one of the dangers possibly that teachers can get into with, and they might not realize, is that if you have been through the sequence and you have arrived at theoretical understanding, it's very easy when you're teaching somebody to think you can teach them how to do everything at once. The audiation part, the oral right to theoretical understanding, because for you it's all the same. They're not different than each other. So I would say, that's really I think what Gordon has pointed out, is that you just got to be mindful when you're doing oral. Make sure you're doing oral, and you're not trying to sneak in, the math on the side,
Yeah.
essentially. But if they're ready for those other concepts,
Yeah.
I really don't think there's anything
I
wrong with
mean,
it.
it's a, before they read rhythm patterns, I want to show them what a big beat looks like, what the little beats look like. And actually, I teach them, you know, before I do that, I teach them some of my more difficult, where the meters are changing. And
Mm-hmm.
we read a whole a whole song of macro beats.
Mm-hmm.
And
With
uh,
changing meters.
with changing meters, that because they've got the tune, and I and then that makes reading duple and triple macro beats like a piece of cake, and micro beats it's just a piece of cake. Um,
Yeah, some of the teachers I worked with always said, "Why do you teach kids to read 6/8?" Like they learned 2/4 and duple and 6/8 on notation. Like it's the exact same time. I just teach them at the same time.
yeah,
And some of them were like, "Why do you teach 6/8? They should be." But how do you get into that conversation?
yeah. Well, so when I'm putting these ridiculous macro beat patterns for tunes, for harmonic functions, and for form, they're seeing form, they're seeing a lot of different things. I just make it ridiculously difficult at the beginning, but it's something they can do after I, just sing it with them. You know, uh, they can do it, but then to go back and do a song that's triple meter consistent or duple meter consistent, it's like they can do they're off and running when I'm ready to do that. Then I start to show them
Yeah,
melodic rhythms, or of course rhythm patterns that are familiar.
sure.
That's pretty
But even
traditional.
though all of what you just did, it could be done just as symbolic association, not as any theoretical. The theoretical piece you were talking about is when you were describing how many macrobeats fit into,
Yes,
or how many
yes,
microbeats fit. But everything else you did wasn't theory. It was just symbolic association.
yeah, exactly. It is,
Yeah,
but I do throw that in because I think it just tells look at that big beat, that's different than that big beat. So I and they're reading 7/8 macro beats before I have them read other meters. Uh, and
hmm
I just found it really successful, so I keep doing it. Plus,
yeah, that's cool.
plus every once in a while you have a kid that's like, "Oh, I recognize that. How do you recognize that? I haven't shown it to you before." And they can get most of the way through. It's like, well, that's just the song. To them, it's like that's just the way the song goes, and I
Yeah.
get it. I also do other things. I do, like I'd say, once we get, we're on the xylophones, we go, well, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. What comes after G? And the kids
Yeah.
say H, or a kid that gets it says A. Yeah, I said A, B, C, D, F, G. Why isn't there H? And it's like, well, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. You know,
That'd be another
there's
thing, right?
it's just da da
Associating
da da
pitch
da da
letters
da.
with
And then I say, if you could go A, what's next to A? And they say B. I said, well, what's in between A and B? Right? And the xylophones always call that B flat, and it's F sharp, but there's no G flat. Or, oftentimes
oh
they
yeah.
just label it one way and not the other,
Oh
with
really?
a flat, yeah, and no sharp. So there's not A flat, A sharp, B flat on the same key. They only call it one thing. So it makes me crazy. So I explained to them, these people labeled your xylophone weird. It's not right. This should be, just take A, and if you go this way, it's A sharp. Now go B. There's nothing in between. Let's skip that. C. What's next? C sharp. So I'm teaching them, just D, D sharp, F, F sharp, G, G
Mhm.
sharp. Oh, let's go backwards. Let's do backwards. I just call them flats. So I just giving them the basic rules of the names of notes, and that when you're going up, it's a sharp, and when you're going down, it's a flat, and there's
Yeah.
nothing in between.
this is where I have a bit of a bone to pick with like the way this is phrased in, learning sequences in music and by Gordon. He says that, I mean, where is it? It's somewhere here about um essentially theoretical understanding, if done too early, can be harmful to someone's audiation. I think more of what he's saying is that if you're only going to do those activities and not go through skill learning sequence and proper teaching
Yeah.
protocol for teaching audiation, yeah, that's going to harm audiation. But really, what he's talking about is an opportunity cost. Is that takes time in a classroom, and so time's going to be diverted away from other activities. But if we had a class, let's say we had two classes with Eric. One class did only standard MLT, no theoretical understanding, but the second class did all that, plus they had an extra 15 minutes of A goes to A sharp, B goes to, there's no way that's going to
Yeah.
be a detriment to their audiation. It's a nonsense statement to me.
I don't think so, because if I knew I was doing what I'm doing is giving access to the kids to the whole landscape in a way that's really easily understood, that really doesn't have anything to do with audiation, except that, by the time I'm doing those kinds of skills with them, they're already doing generalization with me, if not some
Exactly.
kind of exploration. And they're far enough along. They know every tonality except Locrian, and they know all of my crazy metric stuff. It's insane what these kids can do at for their level musically. But what I'm not pushing hard is teaching them to read um, by theory at all. I'm not. I just want
Mm,
to give them the full access to the landscape. The same way I give them, I don't like call it major minor initially when they're ready to learn major minor. I just call it resting tone do, resting tone la. Resting tone do and resting tone la. They can then say, well, I know re. Can re be a resting tone? It gives them access to the full landscape of, hey, can you do that with this resting tone? So if you're just giving them that landscape early on, now that one, is that theoretical understanding a little bit? It's just explaining that there are
right.
different resting tones. It's a piece of information. Um, in verbal association, you're naming things. That's a piece of information. Um, tonic dominant, but it's always related ultimately back to audiation. And if it's not, you got to reconsider what you're doing, or is it you have to make sure it's not getting in the way of increasing their audiation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um, I just wanted to mention that the whole way the that tonality is organized according to Gordon in terms of these seven tonalities plus harmonic minor. And I've talked to you about this a lot, but there are other valid tonalities that different cultures use, and you can all the melodic minor tonalities are not accounted for in here. I think James Jordan talks about them in his sequence. There's some other stuff going on, but the way that Gordon himself has laid out the tonalities is extremely theoretical. There are these tonalities that are parallel to each other, relative to each other is a better term for it, and they all have functions that borrow similar structures but sound different in different contexts. That's entirely a theoretical model of tonality. That's where he's getting these functions from. Uh, it's not it's not anything but that. And to
No,
leave that part out of the musical training at some level, it doesn't seem to make sense to me.
yeah. Given you've taught them to audiate in those tonalities prior to talking about it,
Mm.
you
There's
know,
a
audiation first, always audiation first. And there's some things where that are just pieces of information that don't necessarily have to, you're just describing something outside the realm of, audiation. It's just information. And some of
Mhm.
that can be considered helpful, and some of it may actually be damaging. Teaching names of notes, lines, and spaces, that's just damaging.
Yeah.
Unless you've gotten to the to the point where they've already been composing and improvising, then you're at that music theory and theoretical understanding are one and the same. They're not. You're not separating. Uh,
I was telling you a story about um, I had a student who's in grade 6. She's been taking lessons with me for a couple of years. Haven't done any notation with her. Everything's just by rote. We play drums, piano, guitar, and she started taking band class. Started playing trumpet in band, and I use verbal association with her, so she knows the verbal associates for rhythm, but she never uses counting. And then her band teacher only uses counting and numbers and notation. So she comes home with one of her trumpet pieces, and her band teacher wrote in the counting 1, 2, and I just said, look, like this is do do day do day do. Your band teacher says 1, 2, and 3 and 4. Boom! It took 20 seconds to explain the theoretical underpinnings of how her teacher was counting and associate it to the verbal associates, and she could read the notation and she understands theoretically why some people are using numbers for counting. It did not take, and I will grant that this. I had noticed that this kid is exceptionally sharp in general,
yeah,
but for some people, it's really not a big deal for them to be taught like that. Now, if I had a student where that interaction was very rocky and they didn't notice how the counting was lining up, I would say, you know what, don't worry about it. Just use these verbal associates when you're trying to read these rhythms. It's all good. I wouldn't push it necessarily. I might come back to it in the future, but there is some point where you want to learn how to communicate with other people that aren't using the same rhythm solfege that we're using.
yeah. The big point, I think, like we shouldn't shy away from using bits of theoretical understanding early when it's helpful, and it's not the devil. um, you've got to be thoughtful about it, and Dr. Gordon really rails on teaching music theory as a way to avoid audiation, and he's correct, but he's also got to look at it from the other way. At some level, it's really beneficial at some point. Here's what a flat looks like. Here's what a sharp looks like.
Sure.
You know, when you see this, you should look at the music and say, "Oh, I'm audiating," and he helps you find do by drawing an arrow on the line of the notation so that you know where
Yeah.
do is supposed to be. Um, Often one of the things I do to bridge this kind of thing is I'll invite a 4, 5, 6 year old over to the piano. I said, just play in here. This is where we sing between here and here. I sing here, you sing here. And that's how I explain treble clef, bass clef, right? And I just
Mm.
pick a note and they pick a note. And I said, okay, what do you want that note to be? Re, all right? Or do, or whatever it is. And I say, okay, now do you want that re to be the resting tone, or you want do to be the resting tone? And they start to realize that if you want re to be a resting tone, then I play a song that ends on the re that they picked.
Mm.
If they want re to be the resting tone, or they say I want twinkle twinkle little star, and I want it to be the right resting tone, but you called this re, so now I go re do. So now there's do, and now I play Twinkle Twinkle. But they pick this. They can pick the song. They can pick their a random note, and
Mm.
then and then and then I can play that way. Every note can be anything, and they start
Yeah.
to understand that
Yeah.
without. And I don't think that's theoretical. I think it's just giving them an opportunity to like, hey, I've got the whole world in front of me. Hey, any note could be any note, really.
Mm.
you
I mean,
know
that's the thing that I'm seeing is the difference between association and theory, whether it's verbal association or symbolic versus theory, is with association, you're just saying this is this. Like it's
yeah,
a kinesthetic link, as you put it. It's just saying, this sound that we can audiate, it looks like that, whether it's on the instrument or notation or
yeah,
with a syllable. But theory is getting into the whys of the way things are
yeah,
organized in the way that they are.
yeah. So one of the things I really love to do, they know do re mi fa sol la ti do, right? They know this scale, right? They've sung it because it shows up in in pieces of music all the time, right?
Bum bum ba dum bum 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 bum.
Yeah,
Literally just
yeah,
playing the scale.
yeah. So it's so anyway, they know the scale, and after you sung tonic and dominant and subdominant patterns, scales not not alien to them because they're in music all over the place. I'm not teaching scales to get at key signatures or like that, but I am. And what I do is like, so what somebody come up here and pick one of these. We're gonna make it. You pick the dough. I don't know which dough you want, and they come up and they pick dough, and it's like they pick F, and I say, so here we go. Do, using all the white notes. It's like, oh wait, is that right? Do re mi. It's like do re mi fa. Everybody say do re mi fa. Do re mi. That's they keep going. You know, like that's wrong. So I need a different. I need a black note.
Yeah.
I need a black note, and I call that note B flat because here's B and here's B flat, and now and that's they open the door to say now here's A flat, here's G flat, F. You could say this is E F flat, but it's don't worry about it. Here's E flat, and I've opened the door just to give notes names because you can't go. I can't do that. Oh, let's do it. Somebody else pick a note, and I could do A B C D F G, or or add a flat or a sharp to the name of your note. And they can tell me, or they can just randomly come up and play on the keyboard. They love to play my keyboard because it's like the teacher's only thing. And now they're being allowed, right? So they pick something, and it's like, so now we got to find where do, re, mi, fa, sol. And I pick whatever. They pick B. So I do B major, and I say, well, count how many black notes I played. I played 5, so I just so then I need these 5 black notes to be shown. That's how I teach. Like they're discovering key signature, and I'm showing what they played or what I played, and that's a cross between theoretical understanding and something. It's like I know what major sounds like already. And in order for you to play that in major, now to play songs in major, I need all those tones.
For sure. I mean, this is what I've been explaining this recently on the podcast with this little thing that I've been doing using pitch letters as verbal associates. And, I do my Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in C major and C minor. And then I'll do another song,
Yep.
London Bridge, C major, C minor, Hot Cross Buns, C major, C minor. Then I show them a new major song and I ask, how do I make it minor? And what's amazing about this is that they just do it. They can sing the minor one on their own without me having to get them to sing it first. And they theoretically can explain to me, well, whenever I saw an E in the major one, I knew I had to make it E flat. Or whenever I saw an A in the major one, I knew I had to make it into A flat. That's one of the reasons why I think knowing when theory is useful to introduce, it really depends on what what kind of sequence you're going through. Because if I found using movable do, you can't make that same comparison. The question is meaningless. Like, what's the difference between the major and the minor one? That has to be answered in terms of the solfege syllables they're using. But if I'm trying to get at like the difference is the third of the scale, that makes sense to introduce when you're using a parallel tonality, but it doesn't make sense if you're not using the parallel tonality. So there's like a whole bit of theoretical information I wouldn't teach if I wasn't using the pitch letters. And I think the same goes for movable do. There are pieces of theoretical information you can teach using that system and pieces you can't. Like if I teach that la and do are always, this far away from each other on the staff or this far away from each other on an instrument, that's totally valid theoretically. But, to say, there's just certain theoretical questions that don't line up in that circumstance.
I don't think I use any of my theory stuff if they're not already in some level of generalization. Hopefully they're further up, but some of this is
Yeah, I think
Not kind of
that's
meaningless information to use if it's too early. It you're bypassing audiation, but
yeah.
I get kids, you know, to understand. Like I've got a song. What is it? Oh, Erie Canal, and then you end up in do at the end. So they Lottie, we get to do, but first we're in minor, but then we get to do, right? And then I said, but I could do a song that Twinkle the wrong way. How do I fix it? Right? The I can end both major and minor can end on the same tone, or I can go to the neighbor and so I'm teaching. I get at it. I didn't say exactly how I do it with the kids, but it's basically, I'm teaching parallel and
And relative.
and relative
Yeah,
tonalities um, in a way that they discover it.
sure.
It's like I'm just playing it. Is this you know did I change the resting tone? Yes, but it's still D. Or did I change the rest tone? Yes, I went from do, ti, la, now I'm ending on la. And they know enough songs that have, that juxtapose major and minor within them, like that song. I have a
Yeah.
couple more that are like that.
The generalizing, what you were saying earlier about um, generalizing is a good test of where they are audiation wise in terms of soaking up what's happened orally. I mean, it's to the point where I don't even teach. I don't teach the pitch letter names using the little system I'm tinkering with. I just don't even teach them until they can generalize. So we do a bunch of songs in major, a bunch of songs in minor. They don't know they're playing in C. There's no names of the notes on the piano. I haven't labeled anything. But once they can show me on their own that they can turn a major song into minor, to me that tells me they're generalizing enough and they can sing it on their own.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, then let's just open the floodgates of
Yeah.
of let's just put the notes on your piano and just start playing with this. But I will say that what I'm up to, I do think it makes more sense. I'm not saying it makes more sense than movable do, but it makes sense on the piano. Like I think doing what I'm doing just orally for a singer, I don't know if the validity of that would make any sense. I just don't know why that would be useful to a singer. But the main reason for a piano player is that, in general, the song on the keyboard looks the same in major and minor. There's just certain tones that are moving around. And then once they can pick that up in their audiation and they can generalize, it's such a short like step away from just the theory,
Yeah.
that major, even if we're just doing the first three tones of major, do, re, mi, first three tones of minor, or in my case, C, D, E,
Yeah.
teaching them the concept of what a flat third is, it's easy to teach them, and you don't have to really go into anything further. Major has the big three, minor has the little three, and then they're just like thumbs up. There's no more explanation into that, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's been interesting to play around with.
Yeah. It's the thing. I used to avoid it like the plague and followed the rules. And as I've gotten pretty adept at this after 30 years or so,
Mm-hmm.
um, especially the last 25. You just find out what really works. If you've got an exceptionally smart bunch of kids, they really enjoy that because they can immediately apply whatever theory you're teaching to their audiation.
Yeah. You
And
should hear.
it gives them
Oh, go ahead.
it gives them an access point from a language standpoint to the audiation that they already have. It's like marrying
Yeah.
two worlds, and if they don't have that access point, they're left floundering if they're not both high aptitude and high intelligence with like understanding theory.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Actually, I mean, I have found that you don't really get these issues with theory being like air quote boring when students are actually ready to learn the piece of theoretical information you're going to give them. Like I was teaching a guitar student how to move these certain chord shapes around on the guitar last week actually, and she could audiate the root melody to the progression we are playing. And I was like, okay, if you want to play it in this key, we just start here, and this is what the progression looks like. And then I went into a little bit of how the why the chords are laid out this way. And I tried to warn her. I was like, it's really not a big deal if you don't like this. Like, this isn't really music. This is the math side of things. But she was like, no, this is really interesting. Like, it's cool to know that there's a reason for why this is laid out the way it is. And my theory with this is that she's audiating what she's playing, so it actually has some context and some reason for being interesting. It's not just like random math for no reason.
Yeah, you don't want to introduce theory if there's not a hook back into their listening vocabulary and their generalization. It there's times where it absolutely is wasteful and easy to fall into if you haven't been well bred in music learning theory.
Totally.
We're absolutely not trying to make excuses for teaching the way we got taught, because that's how I got taught was theory. Every good boy does find all that.
I mean, I really think the only reason I did fine is I was constantly doing oral, the street oral of just transcribing things and copying them. And so when you do that for a couple hours every day, and then at school someone's teaching you about music theory, like you turn out not bad.
Yeah, you were in the wild. You were yourself in the wild.
There's a cool video online of Barry Harris, the great piano jazz educator that passed away recently. He's telling a trumpet player what to play, like he's teaching them a line, and he's like, okay, play the tonic of C, go to the second, upper chromatic to the third, then you're going to play the tritone sub off the 5, F sharp, I want you to play the second. And then that's exactly how he explains. He doesn't tell them the individual pitches, like his whole structure for thinking about everything, but then Barry can sing everything he just told you to do. Like, so what's funny about this is it's not like he doesn't have this under his bones, like orally and audiation wise. He just has this extra framework of explaining it in a faster way.
Yeah, it's certainly much easier to communicate, to band members if you just use theory or no, that's this chord, that's the F sharp minor, blah blah, whatever you want to add to it. Language is a shortcut to get to things you already know how to audiate and at the level of theoretical understanding. So
I mean, this is the great debate in the jazz improv community is chord scale theory. We have a song, it has the chord changes. We know what scales go with the chords. We should, air quote, be able to improvise versus, learning vocabulary by ear and tonal patterns and licks and melodies.
Yep.
But, when I started following Barry, I became more convinced that these two worlds are not actually opposed to each other because, a guy at a university says, okay, you can play the tritone sub off the 5 chord and we know the scale for that. But then when you listen to Barry say that, he's saying the same theoretical information, but he's got certain vocabulary that really works over that. And that's what you have to pick up on too. You don't have to copy all of his vocabulary, but you have to see why does his vocabulary and the way he's playing it and resolving his lines, why does those things actually work? But when I put the scale in, it just sounds like mechanical, non-audiated stuff, right?
Yeah. No, there's a reason music learning theory has theoretical understanding is in the sequence. Gordon didn't say, all right, now everything else don't worry about. All this theory. No, theoretical understanding is it's not a throwaway component of learning sequence. It's not.
And he even goes to the point of saying that the stages of the theoretical understanding model they're pretty in depth. There's oral based, verbal based, symbolic based theoretical understanding. There's actually stages to this. It's not it's not a throwaway at the end.
I all I can say, there are all I have not taught through the entire sequence the way I would want to if I had a kid for 12 years. You know, I'm lucky to get a kid. I'm not lucky, but I often
Yeah,
get a kid for 7 or 8 years. Um, and now I got a kid that's going to be 10 if she sticks with me,
wow,
because she's now moved into her father's theory. I do teach theory.
sure.
and, and the father is the department chair of the theory, but his kid has been in my classes since she was born. So now she's
Oh
8,
wow.
and she just skipped a whole level of the theory class because of what I'm teaching. Um, and she gets really excited. Like, what's the name of that tonality? Like,
Sure.
I know that one. I know that. I've heard that before. What's that one again? And it's like she wants the labels to them because she's, just been with me for so long, um, and how to figure them out. And she's learning tunes by rote on her trumpet. She's it's on her own. And her favorite musician is Louis Armstrong. Did this come up earlier?
Nice.
I
No,
was
no.
talking to somebody else earlier this week, and I this was telling the story. It's like, can we watch more Louis Armstrong videos? Because I played Louis Armstrong duet with Danny Kaye, which is just really phenomenal duet on the Saints Go Marching In,
Okay.
and they're just swinging and singing, and oh my God, it's really moving to see these guys. Danny Kaye is a fabulous musician beyond what he was as an actor and a comedian and all that. But it's like a 3-minute video, and I know who that is. That's Louis Armstrong. She says, but I like him better as a trumpet player. And that my heart just like,
Nice.
yes, yes. So I what else about this stuff? I teach. So in my theory classes, I cover dynamics and tempos and how to write. Like
Yeah, there's that other
information.
side to theory that we haven't really been discussing.
Yeah,
Uh,
because it's just information. What does accelerando mean? What is retardando? What is, do you know which is faster, adagio or Dante? And I always have musical examples to play, and I played the Swan like six different, the Swan from Carnival of the Animals, like six different tempos. And they're like,
yeah.
which one did you like? And did they all sound the same to you? How would you describe the difference? Uh, how would you know how to tell this player what you wanted? Well, if you want it exact, quarter note equals 108 or whatever, or you could call it, you know, whatever the name of the tempo is. That's a general anchor for the speed. So I I don't know. There's all that kind of stuff that kind of it doesn't get in the way of audiation. That's just information you need to know because they're reading. These kids are already in band. These kids are already doing stuff
Yeah.
that are out of sequence or whatever. But I'm adding to that, and that's not
Actually, I
in.
mean that situation comes up a lot for me. A lot of my students are they'll take band in grade 7 or 8, and then I'm teaching them piano or guitar outside of band, but the theoretical questions come up, especially with rhythm, because I've discussed this
Yeah,
before.
yeah,
Their
yeah,
band
yeah,
teachers are counting, but I am
right.
willing to just pause for a second, look and say, look, your band teacher is basically just counting do's. So when he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, he's actually thinking do one, do two. I kind of give them something
Yeah,
like that to feed off
yeah,
of, even though it's not perfect. It at least gets the bridge from what we've done in class to what they're doing.
yeah. But like a concept that I found really fun to teach this year is syncopation. It's like, is this jazz because it's syncopated? Is this jazz because of the extra tones in the functions? Is
Hmm.
this jazz because it's swinging? Is this like all the varieties of jazz and crossover types of music like that? Well, jazz doesn't have to be syncopated. Jazz doesn't always have to have extra tones in it. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's like, but I play, I have a list of 20 tunes that they listen to, and they know them, and it's like, well, this is syncopated, but it's not swinging. This is syncopated and swinging. It's hard to find something swing that's not syncopated.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's almost impossible. But
But you get a lot of
but
Latin
like
tunes that don't
Latin
swing, but
syncopation
they're,
is
yeah.
is jazz to them.
Yeah.
Uh, it's especially if there's improvisation going on, and almost always is, and a lot
Yeah,
of the
that makes
Latin
sense to me.
stuff. So, but anyway, it's just fun to show those examples, like me just hammering some things out on the keyboard to draw their listening to. Is this like that? And then I
Yeah.
play some Tito Puente, or is this like that? And I play him you know, some Ella Fitzgerald. Is this like that? And I play him some modern jazz quartet.
Yeah.
Where it's just slow moving, beautiful
Mm.
music that's jazz because of the functions, not as much as you know, not as
Yeah.
much as syncopation.
I mean, I think those vocabulary words. We have that E.D. Hirsch episode. I mean, and one of Hirsch's hobby horses was um, vocabulary matters. For your intellectual development, right?
Well, once you have something that's part of you, body, what has it stick is vocabulary words. That's why there's verbal association after oral. You
Yeah.
need vocabulary to help stick what's in your ear in your brain better, and you anchor it with verbal associate. Without that verbal associate, you just can't remember as much oral.
It's funny the way that harmony classes in university often unfold, um, in terms of it'll be a very theoretical explanation about which functions come in major and minor, and how the progressions lead to one another, and they kind of just implicitly assume that you're going to be playing these on your instrument and will learn to audiate them, but they're never explicitly saying sing the bass lines, don't learn all these progressions at once. Maybe there's a sequence to how you get these in your ear. You should be, and that's why I think we see sometimes in universities, some people take a harmony class and they just implicitly do all that stuff. And the theoretical explanation of everything turned out, it goes in the back door, like how you say
Yep.
it. They start with the theory, but then they give themselves their own oral and start going down
Yep.
some kind of sequence.
Yep.
And I mean, that's what happened to me with the I learned to audiate the seven tonalities, and then I started getting interested in these melodic minor tonalities, which they have parallels to the normal seven tonalities. There'll just be one tone, like Mixolydian flat six is in a ton of film music. It's everywhere, and it's a really recognizable sound once you no 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 no. It's in like Hunger Games and all kinds of stuff. Like it's
Yeah. Okay.
but it's really recognizable. But that tonality, for example, I taught myself to audiate entirely theoretically. I said, okay, I know Mixolydian flat six looks like it's a major scale with a flat six and a flat seven. I mean, that's
Yeah.
how I started
Yeah.
that. And I can build the functions like this. But see, the thing is, I can't get away from doing the oral part of it. I had to go through
you start with theoretical, and it's not theoretical understanding, it's music theory, and then you go from that to oral, and then you have
exactly.
to build yourself back up through to where uh you know just go through, you still got to go through the sequence. If you start with theory, it's just so much more difficult to go through the sequence if you haven't already had enough listening and other listening
Yeah, so I
vocabulary.
think
That's
that's what
key.
happened though. It's like by the time I had gotten there, I had enough of this experience already, and so that now if I you can invent new scale configurations and permutations and learn to recognize those sounds and just take the back door, which is that's what some of these composers are doing. But I think that pretty much wraps it up. I mean, the only last area that I was thinking about is harmonic forms are often
Oh yeah,
um, those can be audiated without not understanding what's going on theoretically at all.
they're
But
they're hard.
theoretically,
They're hard to do if you don't give them like this section. Is this the same section or a different section than that section? And labels, ABA or AABA or whatever.
Yeah.
really important for kids to experience. And I do so much of that teaching just through body movement, you know, through non-locomotor versus locomotor for B section. I've covered that before.
Oh yeah.
But to give them letters to call them sections, you know,
Yeah.
is you know, it's just helpful.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it is, and it gets really useful when students want to get into composing and creativity stuff because they can
Yep.
now think like, well, I liked all the songs that were AABA. I didn't like that ABA thing
And
that
it,
I know a bunch of songs with, so I'm gonna do an AABA song.
and then the songs on the radio that are a, you know, it's just right. They
Yeah.
changed the lyrics, right? But you know,
I mean,
um,
radio's usually it's like verse, chorus, bridge.
yeah.
So
Then and then yeah. No, there's a bunch of other stuff. You know, you know, the pre-chorus, chorus, and stuff in between. So that can get complicated. Um, but there's some songs that are, you know, relatively simple. And you know, if they've written or they've come up, I got a 7-year-old kid came up with her own song, and she wants me to show her what might go with it, and she was going to pick from that, like what functions goes with this.
yeah, that's a great way to do it.
And so I play these functions, and then she says, "Yeah, I like that one for that." No, or that. But it's her own tune, so. But
Hmm.
I keep asking her, well, what else do you want to do with this? Because it lasts all of 10, 15 seconds.
Oh yeah,
You
yeah,
know, but she sings it all day long, her mom says. And so it's like, we got to come up with something different. You know, Twinkle has something different in the middle of it.
oh
Um,
yeah.
every kid song, you know, but if you want to leave it, that it's yours. I got no say. I'm just inviting her to do something and to tell
Yeah.
her, you know, that she's fun. So,
Yeah, that's great.
all right, man. Uh, good conversation. And it's not a curse word in theory.
Yeah.
It can be a curse though if you're not thinking about it properly and having kids audiate before you get to those
Well, I
things.
feel like the jazz community has a lot of jazz teachers have made this rule of thumb like, can you sing what you play or can you sing what you're going to improvise as just a quick shorthand to say like, are you stuck in your head or do you actually know what you're doing here?
Yeah.
And there's more subtlety to it than that, but
All right. Cool deal.
all right, until next time.
All right.